People seem to have a lot of opinions on the combat of Mass Effect 1. It's been called not great but serviceable, very unbalanced, atrocious, pretty terrible, frustrating, and not that frustrating. Let's find out, is it good or is it bad? Hey guys, Dr. Epic here, back with some more Metagel. Seeing as how I have already looked at the combat system of Mass Effect Andromeda, the combat system some people claim to be the best one out of all the Mass Effect games, I only thought it to be fitting to look at the combat system of the OG games, starting with Mass Effect 1. We will start by defining what makes a combat system good, and thereafter compare it to some very different games like Gears of War and Guild Wars. First, thank you for clicking. Now, in Mass Effect, it's really mostly about the story and the dialogue. The combat is really just downtime between encounters with the other characters and making the classic Mass Effect style decisions and choices. What makes a combat system good is similar to what makes a game in general good. It's consistently entertaining, or fun, as some would call it. One of the things that makes a game's combat fun is the depth and satisfaction of its mechanics, skill ceiling, and learning curve. The combat in Mass Effect 1 is in one way perhaps the simplest of the Mass Effect games, but in other ways it's actually one of the more advanced games in the series. How is it simple? Well, you can move, shoot, melee strike, aim, throw a grenade, use powers, crouch, take cover, and sprint, basically. Compared to the other games, especially Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect Andromeda, you don't have as much enhanced mobility, let's say. The Mass Effect formula is basically this. You and two other NPC teammates engage in combat encounter, you use your powers to damage enemies and keep yourself alive, you use relentless gunfire as well as perhaps a bit of tactical positioning. It's not easy to put the Mass Effect 1 combat into a familiar box category that we comfortably know. It flirts a decent bit with the prospect of being a cover shooter with the cover mechanic, and this is something Mass Effect would double down on in the following games. Gears of War 1 launched the year before Mass Effect 1 and often gets the credit for being the GOAT in cover shooters, or at least for bringing cover shooters notably successfully to consoles as well as other cover shooters to wider audiences of the world. In comparison, I think we all agree that Gears of War is smoother than Mass Effect 1, even the non-mastered remastered versions. This is however to be expected, as Gears of War is a much more combat-focused game than the RPG of Mass Effect. A lot of frustrations people have with Mass Effect 1 combat is exactly that it doesn't really feel all that smooth or responsive. It's in times like that we have to remember that Mass Effect isn't just a combat game. In many ways, it's more similar to Guild Wars 1. Let me explain. Guild Wars 1 is also a role-playing third-person game. In that game, combat also revolves around skills, upgrading skills, tactical positioning, equipping and selecting the right combination of teammates for any given situation. You also, in both games, have infinite ammo on your weapons. The only really significant difference is that in Guild Wars 1, you don't really have to aim at the enemy to shoot and deal weapon damage. The game does that for you, as long as you select the foe. I think this comparison gives us some appreciated insight into how to look at Mass Effect 1's combat. It's clear BioWare were very inspired by these classical RPG tendencies, carrying over a lot of legacy from their earlier titles as well, of course. Mass Effect 1 was remastered in the Legendary Edition, and smaller changes were made to make combat more enjoyable. They made it possible to direct individual squad mates, before you had to send both of them at the same time to do stuff. Shepard used to be tired for up to 20 seconds after sprinting. Now the fatigue recovery is reduced to simply 6.5 seconds. Differences from PC and console also occur, such as the display, where consoles use the power wheel and PC users get a so-called heads-up display. Both have possibility to freeze time or tactical pause when you need to think during combat. Legendary variations of the displays are purely aesthetic. A central part of what makes Mass Effect combat fun is the mixing and matching of the various skills or powers or talents, as they're also known as. These are tied to different classes that you choose and the different squad mates that you choose, often to complement your own combat effectiveness. Let's be honest, most of us always choose those squad mates based on what dialogue they have. At this point, I'm choosing the weirdest combination of characters to try and find new dialogue in my playthroughs. And I have to say, Zaid and Grunt really bring a certain unique vibe to every situation. The skills in Mass Effect 1 are defined as tech, biotic, and combat, each having their own area to excel in. Tech is good against synthetic enemies, which you fight a lot of in Mass Effect 1. Biotic is particularly good against unshielded infantry, while combat usually improves your equipped weapons and your armor wearing capabilities. Of course, you can choose between various weapons depending on your class, with the soldier class being able to utilize all of the weapons, choosing between sniper rifles, shotguns, pistols and assault rifles. In the Legendary Edition, a lot of aspects of various weapons have been improved and innovated, such as introduction of different firing modes like bursts and shotgun slugs, and reduced overheat time. They even added in headshot damage multipliers, something which didn't exist before in the unremastered version. All of this gives depth to the combat, making it fun, at least for me. I never felt the learning curve was too steep either in Mass Effect 1, thanks in large part to the ability to freeze time and consider what to do next carefully, no matter the difficulty setting. Though I'll gladly sell for free that one encounter on Therum. The central part of the Mass Effect 1 combat is managing the overheating of your weapons. More shooting, more heating. You can further affect overheating by modifying your weapons using the correct skills and equipping the so-called cold ammo, such as cryo rounds and snowblind rounds. You also have ammo types going the other way, like the high explosive rounds, so you can down prioritize keeping your weapon cool, instead create a one-shot gun with right mods such as rail extensions. I personally prefer reloading mechanics instead of managing overheating, which is part of the reason why I used more UNSC weapons in Halo than I did Covenant weapons. However, I'll admit it adds a certain amount of depth to the game nonetheless, which is good. In summation, I enjoy myself playing Mass Effect 1 combat, especially the remastered version in the Legendary Edition. The learning curve is forgiving, which is perfectly fine since this isn't Dark Souls. The skill ceiling is perfectly fine considering the length of the game in my opinion. I feel like I always have endgame loot in time for the final missions, and in the start I have plenty of opportunity to get serviceable and comfortable gear, regardless of difficulty. I'll say Mass Effect 1 has some pretty decent depth. Even though the game is old, I still find it consistently fun. I really like using the biotics of Mass Effect 1 for instance, just throwing people around all over the place and modifying my guns to be as whack as possible. In conclusion, I would say that Mass Effect 1 combat is fun. It's good.
Your work is appreciated. Well done.
What do you think though? Do you find it atrocious or simply not that frustrating? Feel free to let me hear if I'm off the deep end with this take. Remember, like if cool, dislike if cringe. Dog Rat Big, signing out.